First of all, Karen Finney, you know, Hillary Clinton lost. Is it wise for her to attack Bernie Sanders, do you think, especially when she failed to acknowledge that populism is actually on the rise in America?
Well, actually, I think if you read the book, she talks a lot about these issues, and I think we would, many of us would agree that what you're seeing from Donald Trump is a kind of faux populism. It's not real populism. You know, I sort of reject this question about whether or not she should or shouldn't have written the book. I think a couple of really key points. Number one, she won the primary by, you know, millions of votes. Bernie lost, and he's actually also written a book, and no one's questioning whether or not he should have written a book. She also won the popular vote by more than by 65.3 million, I think, or so votes. And so the question, though, I think becomes, you know, what about all of those people who voted for Hillary, who want to hear from her, who want to hear what was her experience? What are the lessons learned? What are her insights? I mean, one of the quotes you pulled from is actually a chapter that's all about what it is to run for an elected office as a woman. I think there's great value for so many women candidates to hear her perspective on that.
Interestingly, though, Jonathan, she says that Bernie Sanders broke a pledge to keep it clean. You know, he said he routinely portrayed me as a corrupt corporatist who couldn't be trusted. And basically what she goes on to say is that he paved the way for the Trump crooked Hillary campaign.
Well, with all due respect, I think that that's not true. I want to start by agreeing with Karen, and I have never, as speaking for myself and a lot of other Bernie Sanders supporters, surrogates, if you will, she had every right to write this book, and I have no problem with her writing the book. And I also think that, frankly, she's being taken to task in one sense, unlike any other candidate, which is no one is going to write a tell-all book about the candidate of a campaign that they failed at and be totally 100% honest. So I don't think she should be held to a different standard than, frankly, every other political.
Do you think there's enough mea culpa in this? Do you think there's enough of, I mean, she hits out a number of people, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, but do you think she recognizes herself, Karen, do you think she recognizes sufficiently that the way that she actually did conduct the campaign was simply not good enough? And actually, when she talks about, in the book, she talks about convincing Americans that electing Trump was just too big a risk was our best hope. That's a kind of version of Project Fear. It's a negative campaign rather than a positive campaign.
Well, she talks about it in several places, and I think she very unequivocally, in a number of places, again and again, I don't know how many times this poor woman is going to have to, you know, beat, you know, herself for this. She says, I was the candidate. Ultimately, I was the one who lost. I made the decisions. I'm responsible. I'm accountable. But I think it is also the case that Donald Trump winning the presidency is not just because some say, you know, Hillary Clinton was a flawed candidate. You know, I think that is a perspective. I certainly think we made mistakes on our campaign, and I think you can point to any number of things, and they would probably be right. But there were a whole host of other factors that are very relevant, not the least of which we now know, which she does talk about in the book, the hacking and interference campaign by the Russian government. And the more we learn about this, the more there is. And I think one of the points she makes that is so critical here is it would be easy for her to just kind of, people say, you know, she should just shut up and go away. But then we wouldn't have to be asking ourselves these questions about, you know, what is happening in our country right now. And it's part of what Bernie Sanders talked about when we talk about income inequality. Donald Trump is not doing anything to address that issue. So I think some of these issues are worthy of conversation and of exploration, because
let me just bring Jonathan Tasini in here.
Losing, there's a reality about this country.
Jonathan Tasini.
Yeah, I really wanted to try to finish a point before when I was cut off, which is this. Look, I believe that there were lots of things that the Hillary Clinton campaign did wrong. I also think that the media was outrageously incompetent when it came to the campaign. If you go back to its failure to describe Donald Trump as a bigot day after day in the same way that they covered the phony email issue. But to me, what's missing in the book, and what the fundamental point we are at in the Democratic Party, is that there is a fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. And we, if you will, the Bernie Sanders movement and progressives, are trying to take over a party that has entirely failed over the last 10 years under the current leadership. And I say that generally about the Democratic Party establishment. We've lost 900 legislative seats. We have less power than we have had. So just blaming Donald Trump, frankly, for that is missing the point that the Democratic Party is weak and it has to change. And I want to say, here's a great example of 2 days ago when Bernie Sanders introduced a Medicare for All bill to bring what you have in the UK, a real single-payer universal health care, something that Hillary Clinton opposed, and it was much different from both Hillary Care, frankly, and Obamacare, and 16 United States senators, some of whom probably would never have endorsed that before, are now signed out to it. And that's entirely because of the movement and the Democratic primary and the debate over the issues.
Karen Finney.
Well, but hold on, Jonathan. Something I want to add to that, though, because there's a very important point about that. I mean, I agree with Hillary's point that no one person can be the arbiter of what is progressive and what is liberal, and I actually take a different view. I think that, you know, Hillary Clinton not only ran the most progressive presidential campaign in the history of the Democratic Party, I'm very proud, having worked very closely with Bernie Sanders people and a number of our delegates on the platform that we put together that was a combination. It was a lot of Hillary's ideas, but also a number of important ideas from Bernie. I think that that document is very important, and it is a place for us to start as a party.
To reinvigorate. Thank you both very much indeed.
We have a lot of work